Pete Maglio has a way with words, and his way is much, much deeper than you'd expect. It's kind of difficult to explain exactly what Pete does, but it goes much deeper than etymology or phonetics. Pete has downloaded a method, and when I say downloaded, you'll see what I mean during the episode, a method of breaking down the true meaning of words based in analyzing each letter, its symbology, and the true meaning of each letter. It's, again, you'll have to see what I mean when you tune into this episode, but the results are consistent and breathtakingly beautiful. The amount of times that I said wow during this episode and the amount of times I say wow when I talk with Pete cannot be understated. It's really is incredible. So in this episode, Pete and I have a conversation about reality, the purpose of reality, how we change reality, and what he calls the rendering engine and the language that the rendering engine uses through our vocabulary and written languages. So this episode will not disappoint, and I highly recommend watching the video version of it because Pete pulls up some slides to give some more depth to what he's saying, and I recommend tuning into the video so you can see those. As always, thanks again for tuning in, and thanks for supporting my work. If you haven't already, you can support me further by becoming a member of The Way Forward, where you pay whatever you want to be a member. Our membership has some pretty amazing features. Source, which allows you to connect with other consciousness, health, and liberty-oriented people and businesses near you. A marketplace with some of the best deals you'll find on a number of holistic health products and brands, and so much more. And in 2024, we will have a common law-based private membership with local chapters, and of course an app that we're trying to develop that I think I've mentioned once or twice, so members can stay connected with what we're doing and with each other. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again for tuning in, and enjoy this episode with Pete Maglio.
It comes down to this. I mean, I actually, it was funny when I joined Here for the Truth.
Yeah.
With Erasmus and Joel, they requested a
you
bio.
went on their podcast?
Oh yeah. Like
I didn't know that.
June. Yeah, back in June. It was one of their side chats is what they call them.
Got it. How did it go?
It went well. I mean, listen, it was like 2 days prior that he asked me. He's like, "Hey, you want to join this?" I think he requested it on like either Friday night or Saturday. I had a full busy weekend. And he's like, "Yeah, Tuesday." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I had no time for preparation. Jumped on it. I made the mistake of coming straight from the gym, so I was jazzed up. And I also felt the nerves. I'm so out of practice.
Yeah.
I hadn't produced my own content in quite a while. I've been so focused the last couple of years on, the house hunting, moving into a new home and just getting situated, like building my new environment. And I felt like I just vomited information.
Mm-hmm.
And, Joel is completely new to what I do. So I think for him, anybody, and I've learned this, and Steve's been great in that regard of helping bring my attention to the fact that when people are first exposed to what I do and how I interpret letters and symbols, it's so far from what they've been taught.
Yeah.
That there's such a disconnect.
Yeah. I mean, it's like way, way, way deeper than etymology, like way deeper.
Yep. And so I forget that sometimes, and I just run with it, and I'll start I'll take a word and I'll break it down, and my expectation is that they'll hear it. They may not get it at first, but that's fine. But I don't give time. Like I didn't for that episode. They'd ask me a question, and I just vomited like 20 minutes of content. And I realized after the fact, like I need to slow down. I need to take a minute to breathe.
Yeah, it happens to me though too, dude. And like for me, if I don't do some mental preparation before, let's say, someone asked me to come speak on virology or something like that, it's the same with me where I go off on so many different tangents
Mhm.
that I don't even like, I forget the initial question and I just end up somewhere. And then I always end up saying, like, I think I answered your question. I don't really know. I don't remember what
Yeah.
you asked. That's kind of what
Well,
right. It just happened to me the other day. I was interviewed by John Bush for Exit and Build Health Summit. And I felt like it was like one of my worst that I gave, but they've said I both did well, and I'm sure you did well too. And that's the thing is like you end up saying something that is coherent that people can understand ultimately.
yeah. And, I did receive positive feedback from some of those that watched it. And, Joel and Yerasimos, they don't have a YouTube channel any longer.
Yeah,
And so I posted the episode on my channel. And under it, like, the first comment, I just posted like responses to all the questions I didn't answer because I realized, and this is much, I'm sure you can relate with the virology thing, is that you want to answer their question, but then you realize you need to build up like the background to where to so that you can answer it accordingly.
yes,
And then to do what you just shared, it's like you forget where you were,
yep.
and it is what it is.
That's what happens
Um,
in my mind as I'm starting to say something. Something will pop into my mind, a piece of context. I'm like, oh, I need to cover that. So then I'll go off on that tangent, and then
yeah,
that will go really, really deep in that point of context, and then I'll try to come back around to that. And hope most of the time it ends up making sense, but some of the times I'm like, I don't even remember what you asked initially. I just went off on a
sure,
major tangent.
yeah.
Yeah,
And so anyway, going back to that, like they asked me for a bio, and I'm always very apprehensive. Not that I'm embarrassed or ashamed by anything that I've done in my past. I mean, everything was purposeful, helped lead me to where I'm at now.
totally.
I'm never one that like recognizes the achievements in myself.
Mm.
It's kind of like, oh, whatever, I just did that. Others might look upon it like, wow, you did that. I'm like, oh, I guess I did. Yeah, sure. Um, at the same time, where I'm at from a headspace now, I realize that in this modern age, we all desire validity and proof. We want to, it's like this preliminary judgment that needs to take place before we can decide if we want to accept what we're going to hear,
Yeah.
following. And it does everyone such a disservice because they're no longer judging the information for the information's sake. They're judging the person delivering the information.
Amen. Yeah. I
And
still find myself doing that a lot too, honestly.
yeah, and it's because we've all been conditioned to do that. This material world in modernity is the pinnacle of materiality. We forget who we truly are outside of this experience. We forget the cause that produces the effect that we experience.
Mhm.
And so we start judging effects. And and even going to word breakdowns, proof. P is perception. It's that from above, Paul Selig would call this the upper room in his channeling. When you're in the upper room, you're viewing this experience from a better place, from a bigger picture standpoint. And R is the reflection. R is what casts, the information into this experience. The double O, and a single O is a whole or complete. Whether it's an O, a zero, a circle, it's showing you something in its entirety.
Mm.
And then when it's repeated, I interpret that as creation. It's creating something. And then the F is frequency. This is thought. And so perceive, reflect, create, thought. You're perceiving the reflection, creating your thinking. You're coming at it from a materialist standpoint.
Yeah.
That's what proof is.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so, and it's like, I've said this to you before. Sometimes I get in this place where I clearly am out of balance. I recognize that in myself, and I start to doubt myself.
Uh-huh.
Like, did I just make this stuff up? Where did this even come from? But it's like I could not have made this up because it continues to not only reiterate some of the things that I've thought in the past, but like we'll listen to Ra and the Law of One, Seth Speaks, Paul Selig, and I think his channeled material comes from Melchizedek. They all speak to these same things. The recent books that I've been listening to from Paul Selig is his newest book. I mean, it is as if he's reading from my journal over the past
Wow.
year. I mean, his talk about learning to recalibrate so that we're no longer projecting from historical stories. Like history is just it's past experiences. And we were never meant to use that to justify and direct and drive our current experience.
So
And
crazy you're saying that because I was literally just reflecting on that and this is me coming, I get pulled into analytical headspace really easily if I'm not checking myself in a necessary way by doing qigong or some sort of breath work to pull me back into heart space. But from an analytical perspective, looking at it in terms of logic, I see so many people right now, just because it is relevant, justifying what the Israeli government is doing to innocent people in Palestine based on an appeal to tradition. Well, that's just what we've always done with war. That's what happens with war. And it's like, just because that's happened historically with war, that doesn't mean that it's right. That's a logical fallacy, an appeal to tradition. But even more than that, just like you're saying, history is something that occurred in the past that does not necessarily reflect the now moment.
But it is reflecting in the now moment because of our adherence to historical data.
Yeah.
It's historical information that is driving it.
Mm.
It is super interesting. And this goes into like this idea of, for those that are engaged with various scriptures, again, I look at, spiritual practices, all of these religions as we recognize them in the modern age. First of all, everybody needs to realize that the modern practices are highly distorted from their original forms. Yeah. But even so, they all are frosting on the same cake. They're all at the core of every message within all of them. They're telling you the same story. They're telling you that this is a temporary experience that you incarnate to become the flesh of the one self. Mm-hmm. And that in doing so, there's going to be a period of time for which we forget the one self altogether, and we only engage with the flesh, with the material. And it's that dual nature of ourselves, the two aspects of selves that are constantly in competition with another, that are creating that polarity, they're creating that sense of duality. And it's when we learn to recognize and come out of this, moments of separation. And again, everything's purposeful. We do this because if we always stayed in, for lack of better words, a state of bliss, where we knew everything about ourselves, both aspects of mother and father and, feminine and masculine, we would get bored. Mm-hmm. And at some point we'd be like, let's try something else. Let's try separation for a change. And it's that constant ebbs and flows of consciousness expansion and contraction that creates those cycles that, is most aptly talked about in the Hindu traditions with the yugas. But it's like all of the traditions talk about this, the two aspects of self, that are in competition, and then the forgetting happens, and then there's the remembering. Yeah. And it's like we're in a state right now where many of us are coming into that awareness, coming into that recognition that we are all individual personifications of the one self, all meant to have a unique perspective. And it's through the sharing of our perspective, we create a shared experience that is supposed to be play. Mm. And it's like right now, the turbulence and the hardship that some are experiencing, and it's like I sometimes can, I think, come off as cold. Sometimes my wife will accuse me like, you're not showing any emotion. It's not that I don't feel these things. It's not that I don't recognize these things. What you just spoke about, and I've watched some of your podcasts and listened to some of the things that others have shared. I don't give it attention outside of just, okay, that's going on. Do I not, feel heartache, for lack of better words, for what others are experiencing, other, individuations of the one self? Of course I feel heartache. They've forgotten who they are, what they are, where they are.
Yeah, and I think that's precisely why I comment, which then pulls me back into the illusion, though. And that's the dance. I commented on that, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, we get caught up in the stories and the stories of others' experiences. And this is what's so interesting, not to go on a huge tangent. I often find in all of the mythologies that we share with one another that have been passed down to us, they're all embedded with such wisdom if you have the lens to perceive it. And we see the stories of Tolkien and the one ring to rule them all. All a ring is a full loop of the rendering engine. It's like the ing is incarnate normalized spirit. Spirit is the energy of the game, of the rendering engine. It's the 6 and the 9 in collaboration with one another. It's 6 energy is outward experiencing, it's separation, and 9 energy is integrated. It's bringing everything back in and learning from that. And when those 6 and 9 are in dance, it's spirit, and spirit's rounding the 8. And the 8 is that rendering engine. Anyway, ring is reflect, incarnate normalized spirit, reflect that feedback loop. And the one ring to rule them all is that one shared perception of reality.
Wow.
And to me, we've talked about this, I think, when we were first talking about electrification of the realm, and author, was it
Arthur
Thurstenberg?
Furstenberg.
Furstenberg, yeah, The Invisible Rainbow. And basically he's looking at it from a radiation EMF standpoint, and making the connections to somebody having expressions of illness. I look at it as the mass communication that was enabled, first with the radio, then with the television, and now today with the internet. And it's netting our inters, right? It's bringing everything in. It's having access to what's going on in everybody's thoughts. And once you have understanding of what all of the different nodes of consciousness, all of these different individuations of the one self are thinking, you can predict the future, because we co-create this experience. And it's just that one ring through radio, through TV, through now film, has constantly gotten everybody to think and perceive and expect the same things out of reality, which locks those in place. We fix those things into our now moment. And the only way out of it is to shift it, to start recognizing how wondrous and magical this experience can be, and start to, again, focus on optimal experiences. What do we want to have?
This is what I struggle with. Like, I'm going to try to articulate this as best I can. When I see massive amount of people, especially people that I typically identify with to some degree, right? Which is a problem in and of itself. But let's say, like, we have the freedom movement, who I currently perceive being pulled into something that will help bring about more chaos, suffering, division, and just add more layers on top of us needing to rip off layers to get back to the true self and who we truly are, right? And it's like, I go back and forth on this, and I say this while recognizing I've been commenting a lot on Israel Palestine, but it's for that reason. But in my commenting, I recognize too that in some of the cases, especially when I see, imagery of what is actually occurring, it frustrates me to no end, given that the people who I typically identify with are calling for more of that, perpetuating more of, what I had previously thought that we were collectively in agreement on that we don't want more of, right? And in my commenting, though, I also wonder how much of it is me just helping to perpetuate it. But then the flip side of me says, well, this needs to be commented on because it is true in the now moment. So I go back and forth on this so much, dude.
Yeah, no, I can see that struggle, and I've recognized that in you and many others. Matt Belair, I still support him, monetarily, just through helping him in his, I think, Kajabi. I don't follow his channel anymore because he's gotten so caught up with bringing people's attention to the darkness. This idea that you have to bring attention to the quote unquote perceived darkness of our reality in order to eliminate it. In the way that I've come to understand the rendering of this reality, that's actually not the case.
Wow.
Because what you're doing is legitimizing it. And it goes back to that idea of the tugging of a rope. For those who are trying to create this reality according to their will, and that's all it is. Like, we can't, each of us as an individual cannot influence the one ring to rule them all, to only render our will.
Yeah.
We have to get the other nodes of consciousness to buy into it. And how do we do that? We get them to tug on that rope. And it doesn't matter which side you're on of that rope. Are you for this side or that side? Or even just watching it take place? You're engaged. And it's through that engagement that's bringing awareness and thoughts to your mind. And it's just that very thinking and having an emotional reaction to it, you're helping further perpetuate it.
So I want to ask a little bit more, because this is like I guess you could say a reconfiguration for me and how I approach things, or a possible one, right? Like, that's what we're having here in this conversation. I don't want to make this conversation about me, because I want to get to you talking about the rendering engine and what these letter symbols mean, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this is helpful to hear. So, I commented the other day, I did a podcast with Peggy Hall, and I said,
I watched it, by the way.
Yeah. And I said, what drives people into right action or inaction, and further what drives their beliefs, which influences how they project their individuated node of consciousness, as you're calling it, into this reality, is their thoughts and feelings, and then of course their beliefs too. So I've said that's the reason that I'm commenting on this situation, in hopes of getting people to understand the better way to approach this whole situation. And so on top of that, I spoke at the Weston A. Price conference about a week and a half ago. And the amount of people that came up to me saying how much my just speaking helped to influence their thoughts, feelings, and beliefs towards a better way of life was something, it was just amazing feedback to hear from these people, essentially. And that sort of validated my speaking on this Israel-Palestine thing. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So it's a tough one, because I recognize that there's an opportunity to help those that maybe not. You're filling the gap is basically the best way to put it,
Yeah.
right? There are those that are so far away from a more, like, for lack of better words, spiritual way of conceiving or perceiving our reality.
Yeah.
They're very much locked into that modernistic, nihilistic, materialistic standpoint.
Mhm.
And so if I were to come out and speak on all of the things I speak to, there would be such a disconnect and so much cognitive bias and dissonance that it wouldn't have any effect or impact on them whatsoever. And so is there a place for someone like yourself that can play in both playgrounds to help bridge that gap? Sure. I don't see why not. I mean, for me, again, it comes back to like recalibrating and no longer allowing, historical information to drive our experience.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, when you think of this idea of be like a child, right? And I, often would say, like, or especially early on before I understood the full breakdowns of the letters, was, I referred to child as being chi led. You're being chi led, led by the inner energy.
Wow.
But the one thing about a child, what's interesting
Chi
is when you
led, and you're talking about chi, like the energy that moves.
Yep, exactly.
Chi led. Wow.
Well, the word child is C is to see. It's a circle that has a section cut out of it so that you can see what's within the hole. It was previously a circle, which was a hole. Now you're
like
cutting
an
a section
eyeball
out.
without a lens on it, essentially.
Yeah. So you're seeing. H is soul. And what's interesting too, and I think you heard me speak to this early on, that I would often take the U out of soul. So SOL, which interestingly enough is often referred to as the sun, the soul, because I was referring to the individuated soul. I've now recognized there is only one soul. It's only it's again, going back to the Paul Selig, it's the one note sung. Soul is just the blueprint for reality. And it's the optimized blueprint. Now we have the free will to deviate from that plan, which we often do to its highest degree during modernity. Yeah. But anyway, going back to H being soul, I is incarnate. So now high, soul incarnate. So C, soul incarnate. L is consciousness. L is the right angle, right? L, consciousness is just observation energy, right? It's an awareness energy. And then D is dimension. D is in-game perspective. So C, soul incarnate, consciousness, dimension. That a child is, often associated with innocence because it's a fresh perspective. And what changes someone from a child to, what we perceive as an adult is memory. Memory absorbs all information, and it allows for programming, allows for all of those historical narratives and stories to take place. A child goes out and just experiences with only its senses. Its mind is this, all our minds are here for is to interpret the information coming in via our senses. What has basically ruined that for us during modernity is we become so engaged with memory and programming that we let that drive our experiences. You go out to a child, they often lose track of time. They're out there having fun, just again, engaged with sensation, no more. And it's like, we need to get back to that place. And this is why, going back to, like, you talked about stories and you saw images and to be true. I would question that. How do you know them to be true? I mean, you can trust the people giving them to you, but did you take that information in via your own senses?
Yeah.
And if not,
really good point.
I mean, that's what I've gotten to a point with myself is I just needed to default to that. Did I not take this in with my own senses? Was it not through an image? Was it not through somebody's, story they're telling me?
Yeah.
And if it wasn't through my own senses, then how can I possibly make a judgment upon it?
Yeah. And ironically, what I'm falling prey to in that is exactly what let me be clear here. What I'm falling prey to in that also I'm able to catch myself and not make it or not let it have me justifying more of the same energy that perpetuates that which does not reflect the one true self, right?
Mm.
But ironically, what I am ultimately falling prey to is the exact same thing that I'm commenting on other people falling prey to. That unfortunately for many people does drive them to call for and justify or turn a blind eye to the dark things that are happening in the world.
It's a challenging place that you're in, Alec, because you have such a large following. I have a tendency to always avoid groups and,
Yeah.
and joining anything so that I can stay fully independent.
Yeah.
When you create a following, what you're doing is reinforcing a certain perspective. And so
Yeah.
again, you've created a ring. And so with every node of consciousness, every personification that gives energy and attention to you, there's an expectation attached to that of how you're going to show up. And so that's a constant tug on your energy
Yeah.
to speak to certain things. And I'm sure if you decided to not speak on any of that, you probably have some people outraged. Like, how can you, with your platform, how can you not speak on these
Yeah.
things? You're so irresponsible. It's just, again, that's a lack of recognition for what drives this experience.
Mhm.
And it's a tough position that you're in. And so I totally recognize, and I can't relate to that degree. I don't have a following like you, but it's tough to.
Well, you have your wife saying that to you though. So that's one thing.
Well, and the thing is, should I ever increase my following? Should I ever take the steps and do so? It's important to have people surrounding you that will keep you grounded. That
Mhm.
not, this goes into ego, right? To me, ego, E is energy, is associated with mental energy. G again is spirit, and O is full or complete. So energy, spirit, full. Spirit is associated with the energy, the river of energy that renders our game. And so ego is nothing more than the pull of the game. And so when you get caught up in the pull of the game, which is usually attached to other people's expectations of how you'll show up, which is why it's usually associated with pride. You're being very egoic. You're being sucked into that character. It's a tough place to be when other people's energy while they're experiencing the game have an expectation of you, and for you to totally disregard it or detach from that influence.
Mhm.
And the only way you can do that is through what you talked about before with qigong, meditation practices, breath work, all of those various things to help
Yeah.
keep us in a centered place.
What I think those practices do is pierce all the distortions of identity that we aren't, so that we, um, if we're not doing it consistently, then it's temporary. But if the more that we do it, I think it sort of creates um, a field around us that sort of sits with us throughout the day. But I think what it's doing is piercing those false identities. And I was thinking about how both through COVID, really throughout all of history, but especially recently from my perspective, both through COVID and then also especially through this situation, anyone who has an attachment to a certain man-made identity is really, really struggling right now, because in order for us to get back to the truth self, we have to uproot all of those false identities, which is why people who identify as Christian, people who identify as Muslim, people who identify as Jewish, as Palestinian, as Israeli, identifying with the Israeli government, as an American, are all being challenged in major, major ways right now. I would even say people who identify as a truther, people identify as a thought leader, people who identify as a podcaster like myself, people who have whatever the identity, the actual name associated with having a platform and a following, people of all types of identities are being challenged in a major way right now. And it's like the only thing that comes to mind right now is like weeping, moaning, and gnashing of teeth. Like that's like, and I think that's from a Kanye song, which is a paraphrased Bible verse. But the point is, that's what the identities are doing that are parasitically attached to us. They're like gnashing and fighting back to stay alive and stay relevant in us right now.
Absolutely. And by the way, that verse I have dug into quite a bit, because when I would read gnashing of teeth, I'm like, what is it referring to? But now it makes so much sense. Spirit again, energy of the game. Energy of the game's doing what? It's normalizing temporal. NA is normalized temporal. Temporal what? Vesseler game soul. Or vibration of soul. S is vibration, H is soul. So Nash, spirit, normalized temporal vibration, soul, and then the ing is like bringing that into a recurrence, incarnate normalized spirit. It's again associated with the in-game energy. And then T is a Vesseler game. The double E is powering, but it's because it's the two E's and not the EA. It's usually mental power. And then T again, Vesseler game, soul. So it's talking about the gnashing of teeth is all the in-game energy further driving the in-game experiences. And that's exactly what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
You're letting your in-game character drive this experience based upon historical information and data,
Wow.
the stories and narratives.
Wow. And so that's crazy that came up for me in describing that. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah. And listen, when we have some level of connection, and even for those that aren't consciously aware of their connection with their higher aspect, we're all part of that one self, and the one self is going to use all of its various nodes to inform the others.
Yeah.
Which is where creative inspiration comes into play. Somebody might paint something or produce lyrics to a song and have no intention behind the message that's actually delivered to others that have the lens to see.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have the early on, most awakened people will be like, oh, they know about this, they're all in on it. And it's like, no, they're not. Some of them may be, but most of them are just inspired.
100%.
And it's the energy that's just of the one self that's just using those as conduits.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, again, for those that have when their eyes are open, you see it everywhere in all of the film and all of the lyrics of songs, in old artwork. Like, it's everywhere. Of course it is, because you're now alert and aware of the one self's influence on all of creation.
Yeah. Wow.
And this is also goes into when it comes to what I do with the letters. I don't no longer let historical perceptions of language drive how I interpret. There's some lessons to be learned by studying phonetics and studying the propagation of perceived root languages. But it's like, at what point do you reach the original root? Who knows? This realm, from my viewpoint, is eternal. It's forever. There's no beginning and no end to this realm of this womb of experiencing. And so what you've tracked down as identifying as the original, the root, is just the beginning of a new stage of the game. There was a previous episode that you're failing to recognize. And this is like, I've used this analogy in the past, but going to like a football field and, down to like the local high school, going down that football field and trying to analyze the blades of grass and all the divots and from cleat marks and everything else, and think that only one game has ever been played there. How many games have been played in that field? And I'd be doing myself a disservice to make judgments, thinking that there was only one game. How many erroneous, distorted, interpretations would I come up with? And so again, if only the now moment exists, and if the one self is constantly using us as conduits to inform itself, then I got to trust my own instincts, my own judgments, the own thoughts that come into my mind to help guide me down a certain path. Will I make some missteps? Of course. And it's usually when I let my thinking mind overtake my knowing self. But it's so interesting in that regard. People talk about, I've like the I and the J, like the J didn't exist before a certain amount of time. Maybe, but that actually makes sense, because if you think about the idea of the fall, we fell into this lower state of materialization. So we're incarnating, and it's only in that fall state do we have to look back and try to raise ourselves up again. So maybe that accounts for that little turn backward.
What does J mean in your little letter symbol?
Journey.
Wow.
And so we incarnate and then start our journey back.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And so it's super interesting.
Let's get into more of the specifics, because by now we've covered a lot of words, and I'm sure people listening or watching are like, what the hell are they
Yeah.
talking about? But yeah, let's just go. Let's start first before we go down each letter in the English alphabet, with where this concept even came for you.
Yeah. For me, again, I started in the phonetic route. Like I started when I first had my awakening. I wanted to know what that experience was.
Mm.
I was seeking out anybody who's speaking to anything spiritually related because I was trying to understand, that incredible experience that I had. And some of the early people I tuned into from a YouTube standpoint were like Santos Bonacci, Seven Bomar. Um, I mean, there were numerous others, but I think it was Santos that really brought my attention to some of the phenomenal books that I had never heard of. Alvin Boyd Kuhn's The Esoteric Structure of the Alphabet. Um, can't think of there's many others, but anyway, like it was Alvin Boyd's Kuhn book. Like when I picked that up and started to look at how he was describing language and the alphabet and the structure and bringing some of these concepts rather that I had never heard of before that are associated with a lot of metaphysical things like in the Kabbalion and the various laws, these universal laws as they're portrayed. I then dug into Rene Schwaller de Lubitz, and his symbol and the symbolic, and he coming from a background of being an Egyptologist, he was looking at all of these languages that were pictographic, and it was that forced me into looking at things from at the right hemisphere, right? The visual standpoint, as opposed to just the sound that these, supposed things created. And it was that shift when I allowed for it that started to guide me to basically deviate from phonetic study and to start to just say, why are these symbols drawn the way they're drawn?
Mm.
There's got to be a reason. Like why, this again, we talked about the C. Why is the C that shape? Why is the O that shape? Why is the capital A shaped the way it's shaped? And initially, I had no idea. And it was just through further study, through further contemplation, through meditation. I would wake up out of dreams and just have these thoughts repeating in my mind. And I'd write them down,
Wow.
which that happens now and again. And, it's like I go through, waves of, times where I feel like, am I disconnected? I feel like I have no new information coming into my mind.
Yeah.
And then other times where it's like I'm bombarded. Like even recently, not to go on a tangent, recently I woke up, like I think it was like 2 weeks ago, with the 5 6 repeating in my head, 5 6 5 6 5 6 5. And then it dawned on me, holy shit. Like when I show you the rendering engine, you'll see the 5 and the 6 are located on the bottom. 5 is associated with a material expression. It has both the curvature and the straight angles of masculine and feminine. It's bringing those together to create a physical experience. This is why many have, I don't know if you've heard this before, that physical is a 5 cycle. 5 cycle is physical. I knew that. I knew this idea of 5 cycle. I never connected it to the 6 on the other side of it. 6 is just experiencing energy. It's the energy of a sensation and separation. And the bottom being 5 and 6. And if you go, it's clockwise energy. So it starts with 5 and then we move over to 6. Physics, 5 6 5 6. It's physics.
Whoa.
The physical experience is just the 5 and the 6 together. It's the production of the game and then the experiencing of the game. And it forced me when I wrote this down in my, and this is how it usually happens. I'll have one thought, write it down in my journal, and then it all starts to unfold within my mind. And I started to realize, like, holy crap, why didn't I not recognize this before? That the idea of psych or psychology, psych and physics, they're the same assortment of letters, except the only difference is physics has the IC or the ICS if you want to physics. Psych is PSYCH, right? It goes from psych to physics, PHYS, and then ICS, right? And then really what there's a transpondence, and it's hard to follow me. This is where I lose people, is it's really the S flipping with the H. And I continue to write in my journal, well, H is soul, which is the blueprint for reality, and S is the vibration, which is the blueprint expressed. And so we go from psych, which is thoughts, to a physical expression, which is the blueprint now being expressed. And I realized that psychological becomes physical. And then I looked at the other ones, like through chemical, biological, geological, all of those various what we perceive as different scientific studies are just basically the stages going from psychology to physical. And it's like, this is how it happens in my mind. It blows me away. It's like every time, like, where did this come from? I don't know. It's like my higher aspect has saw an opportunity to teach me. And this is why I'm always very explicit in saying this. What I do might not resonate with people, and that's fine. Like, this is how my higher aspect has saw an opportunity, an avenue to speak to me, to help teach me. It's my guru, not yours. If you resonate or something, triggers within you and you find a connection, awesome. That's great. We're meant to share with each other our own perspectives. But I'll never place judgment on others being like, you're doing it wrong. You were recently going to have Marty Leeds on it. He goes about it completely different from myself. And with the gematria and everything else. At the end of the day, I don't care the avenue for which you take to get to the insights that are generated. If the insights that are generated resonate with my own, fantastic.
This kind of goes full circle to what we were talking about earlier, where you said all these different religious traditions are just the icing on the same cake, different types of icing on the same cake. And I'm reflecting now when you're bringing up how this may not resonate with everyone, but this is how your higher aspect, or the true self, the one true self, communicates with you, with your individuated aspect of the whole, right? I did an episode with Don Lester and David Parker on the nature of reality, and I brought up people who claim to communicate with angels, people who channel, people who just get intuitive insights, people who have dreams, people who are visited by their guides, people who are, you could go on a list of these. And then, of course, different religious traditions. Native Americans saw God as a wolf, some Native American, So what we came to in that episode is that the one true self will tailor itself to fit the needs of the individual in order to communicate a message that helps point that individual back towards the one true self. And it's going to be based on that individuals, the way that individual is constituted, based on their experiences, based, unfortunately, because we are in this illusion, on their history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all intended to help point that individual back towards the one true self. So for you, this is how it expresses. This is how the one true self communicates with you.
100%. And it goes back to the idea of again, being, this is a playground or a sandbox. If you're going to try to communicate a deeper message, a timeless message outside of this temporal experience, all you have to work with is the toys that are in that sandbox. And different kids are going to have different toys. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just a way it always works. And this also goes into why, ultimately it's the same teaching repackaged from culture to culture.
Yeah.
If I were to try, like even now, we do this all the time in our modern age. If I were to try to share something that happened to me with you, I will find something that we can relate to. It might be a movie. We might have both seen a movie and be like, dude, it was just like this scene from that movie, and this character very much like that. And that's how I would convey my message. It's allegory. And I had this early on. This was like probably 2 years ago. I'm not going to mention names. So it was one of your followers, him and I connected. And he went from very much interested in yogic practices and a lot of the Eastern traditions, and then suddenly became this devout Christian follower and a Christian literalist, and was like agitated by everything going on. He saw all of the demonic presence and Satan, Lucifer, and him and I started to have this exchange. And he was very much like anybody that's in that state of mind is very angry if you ever reinterpret scripture. Mm-hmm. Like that is sinful. It is not to be changed. And first of all, you have to recognize a different note of consciousness produced that writing. It was individuated expression that produced it. Yeah. And so you're basically saying that expression was not fallible. But two, to take it literally is such a disservice. Yeah. Because literal interpretation requires you to have a full understanding of all the different context within that period of time. Because over time we interpret things differently.
Amen. Yeah.
And so it's like, of course, it has to be allegory. It's the only way that message can stand the test of time. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of people fail to realize that.
Yeah.
Based on programming, based upon a multitude of things, and it stinks. It stinks that they're not at that point where they're open to others' interpretations. But at some point, they probably will. At some point, they're going to be, that blockage within themselves is going to open up. And once it does, that's when the magic happens. And you and I both know that. That's when the magic happens.
Another thing that I reflect on, and we'll get to the letter symbols eventually, is that everything right now could be so much better if people would simply learn to stop identifying with all the things they're identifying with in this world. And at the same time, because they're individuated portions of consciousness, everything right now is absolutely perfect and exactly as it should be. What do you think?
It is amazing when you give in to recognizing that you are fully taken care of.
Yeah.
It's shifting from a scarcity lack mindset to an abundance mindset. These are two different channel. Like basically, we're a radio, right? If we're a radio, and what station are you tuning into? Are you tuning into heavy metal or classical music? Let's just for this analogy, we'll use heavy metal as scarcity lack mindset. We'll use classical music as abundance mindset. You can't tune into heavy metal and expect it to produce classical music. It doesn't happen. And many people get caught up in that standpoint. They think they're in an abundance mindset, and yet everything else within the reality they're experiencing is all built on scarcity lack. And I catch myself all the time. We've been all programmed. Modernity programs us to have a scarcity lack mindset. We're told the world is ending. We're told, all of these things. We're running out of resources. We're told that you have to save up to prepare for certain things. It's like always pulling us out of that now moment, either past orientation or future orientation. And it's a hard thing to do, and only do it through practice. Like all the various other practices through meditation, all those breathing exercises, what they help you do is harness the mind. You're not, for those that have never done any of that work, what happens when you first start to do it? I can't do it. I can't meditate. My mind's all over the place. That's how it starts for everyone. Just sit still for 10 minutes. Just get into the practice of just sitting still. Let your mind do whatever it does.
Yeah. And if your mind wanders, what I always do in that is like, because I used to shame myself, like, I can't clear my mind, is I just come back to my breath. That's it. And just like, oh, okay, I recognize myself being pulled. That's what happens with my monkey mind. And then I just come back to my breath. That's it. Very simple.
It's interesting you mentioned monkey mind, right? Again,
oh boy, here we go.
We're preconditioned. We're preconditioned to associate this idea of, monkey and lizard brain, and it's a part of you. Part of you is an aspect of yourself. But yeah, to just allow those thoughts to go and just to become, whether you're not allowed, whether you would get to the point of being able to focus on just the breath. But even if for people that aren't able to get to that point, observe your thoughts. Just watch them. Because just through the act of observation, you're curbing the act of thinking. And eventually all of that will slow down. But anyway, all of that practices are just getting you to be able to start controlling how your mind is operating. Because you get into that practice, then you can start to catch yourself in certain moments where, a bill shows up on your, like you weren't expecting, like, oh man. But if you just realize, like, wow, how amazing it is that the one self can individuate into this expression within this physical experience and experience this idea of lack and scarcity. Like, that's pretty cool. But then you shift out of it and realize I'm always taken care of.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, like, this has happened to me over and over again. And not only is it good for myself to reinforce it within my own mind, but I always use it as an opportunity, especially with my wife, to reinforce it to her. Because of everything we've experienced over the last several years, especially with me going from, corporate executive to startup founder to, driving Uber, and then completely without any like source of steady income. I would do some freelance work and web development and everything else on the side, but it was no steady, stream of income. And from an outside perspective, I would be viewed as irresponsible. Like, how could you possibly do that to you? And yet, it always shows up in the moment when we need something. It always showed up, always.
Wow.
And even recently, my wife's birthday was recent, and it was actually Ayla Cuenca posted on one of her channels this like skincare item. Now Lauren, my wife, is very much into that's her creative outlet is like makeup and things like that.
Got it.
She tries to stay with the good stuff, the organic botanical way.
Kylie's the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. I I always tell her she's beautiful without it, but
Same.
that's how she expresses. And so when Ayla posted this thing for this brand, I had never heard of it. I don't know anything in that space, but it sounded interesting. And I trusted Ayla and some of the other things she shared. So I'm like, might as well check it out. Had no idea how expensive it was till I landed on the page. I was like, holy cow, like women spend this much money on these types of products. And I had that moment of scarcity, lack mindset of like, I can't afford, what? And I said, you know what? No, I'm, I'm going to anchor into the heart space and in the intention of doing this out of love and in knowing that my wife will appreciate this. And I spent it. And 2 seconds later, a guy that I had done some web development work with in the past sent me a Venmo for $1,000 out of the blue. I was like, and I reached
You
out
know
to
what's
him.
so crazy is every time, and trust me, especially with like the dissolution of health freedom for humanity, like immediately losing my income after just buying a house and getting us out of living with my mom, like both my wife and kids and I were living with my mom for 6 months. There's a lot of fear about not being able to make ends meet. Like even like you probably saw my post in June, I had $4 in our family bank account at one point, like $4. And luckily, our next check came in. But every single time, every time without fail that I have thought we are about to lose it all and go under and we're going to have to move and sell our house or something like that, something comes every single time out of the blue, out of nowhere, just like in that situation. That one is more direct though, where like right afterwards you got $1,000, but every single time I'm provided for every time.
Mm-hmm. Always. And it's, to me, one that's a good indicator that I'm heart aligned, that I'm in the right headspace. And it's always after I've shifted. Because again, we have to realize today's thoughts are tomorrow's experiences.
Yep. Amen.
And so if you're like, I'm screwed, I'm not going to be able to afford this, all you're doing is calling those experiences into tomorrow. So it's like, you got to reframe it. I'm taken care of. I'm like, I constantly tell my wife, like, we have like, look at this home, look at the garden, look at our dog, look at all these plants inside the house. Like you and I, we have so much to be grateful for, so much appreciation. And why is the idea of being grateful and appreciative the gratitude such a huge important part of all of the spiritual practices? Because there's an understanding that if you tune into classical music, again, the gratitude, abundance mindset, it'll be reinforced. You'll hear more of those songs, more things to be grateful for, more things to be appreciative of. If you're in the scarcity mindset, that's what you're calling forth. If like, I can't afford, oh my gosh, there's another bill, I just got into an accident, holy cow, I can't do. All you're going to call forth is more of those experiences. And it's so hard in this day and age when we're confronted with the news, like I tell my parents and my in-laws all the time, and I no longer say it because it's like, they're not receptive to it, but it's their choice, their experiences. All the news does is hammer home all these reasons to be fearful.
Yeah.
If you think our world is scary,
and social media algorithms now, not just the news, social media algorithms too.
Well, algorithms, what do? They're doing is showing you, they're basically showing you what you're looking at. They're reinforcing it. Algorithms are built to, well, this goes into, again, if you want to control this reality, what do you need to do? You need to understand the inner thoughts of all of the different nodes. You're netting their enters, the internet, right? And so you're using that information to produce potentials, and you're fine tuning those probabilities of what potentials. They'll never be able to fully calculate what will actualize. All they'll be able to do is have a highly accurate prediction narrowed down to maybe a few dozen potentials. But they can only do that through all of our interactions with all these different channels that have become digital. It's the digitization that has enabled it. But going back to the idea of scarcity and abundance mindset, when you think that this world is scary, that there's villains out there, that there's so much things to worry about, all you're doing is reinforcing those experiences within your own life. If you have a different mindset, that where this world is magical and it's amazing and every day's new, all you're doing is calling forth more opportunities to experience that. And this is the reason why somebody can go to, for a small example, somebody can go to one restaurant, have a phenomenal experience. Next person goes to that same restaurant, has a terrible experience. What changed? Same restaurant, maybe even the same server, maybe even the same meal ordered off the same menu. totally different experience because it's a different person, different node engaging with it. And so it's calling forth a different expression.
We all know that big ag is poisoning our food supply, and big pharma's so-called medicine is straight up poison. What most people aren't aware of, though, is that most supplements are also filled with artificial sweeteners, dyes, GMOs, glyphosate, and a host of other toxic ingredients, even many of the more natural supplements. My good buddy James Benefico dedicated his life to crafting the world's cleanest, most nutritious organic supplements after a pre-workout energy drink caused heart palpitations so severe that he almost landed up in the ER. Organic Muscle was born, revolutionizing sports nutrition by using exclusively non-GMO ingredients from USDA organic farms. Since then, tens of thousands of people, including myself, have leveled up their fitness and their health with Organic Muscle's award-winning natural pre-workout. There's no jitters, no heart palpitations, no itchy skin, just nourishing organic food and herb-based ingredients for clean, sustained energy, strength, endurance, and recovery. Numerous studies have shown that tonka ali is the most effective herb in the world for naturally boosting testosterone levels. And we know that testosterone levels are depleting all over the world because of what's put in the food supply, what we're exposed to. Organic Muscle has the world's first fully organic tonka ali supplement. I only support and promote things that I actually use, and I can say I legitimately use Organic Muscle products. Use code FORWARD15 at checkout for 15% off at organicmuscle.com. When we're caught up in this illusion, taking on the identity of I am the flesh, like that is fundamentally who I am. And then on top of I am the flesh, what we do is I am the flesh who is also a Republican, a Democrat, MAGA, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Arab, Palestinian, whatever. That is exactly what trying to find an appropriate word because they're useful, but the machine, right? Like the powers that shouldn't be, whatever we want to refer to them as, you get what I'm saying. That's exactly what they play on to reinforce more of the thing. It's always a play on our false identities and then a play on the true essence of who I am is the body, which isn't true, right? And anytime you self-identify with those superficial labels and self-identify with the body, you are subject to the propaganda, the fear-based propaganda associated with those labels and the body. And that's exactly what they play on over and over and over and over and over again.
And the reality of it is, are there those within this experience that have that knowledge to what we're speaking to, where they can take advantage of it and use it maliciously, to shape reality? Potentially. A lot of it is just people that are in a too materialistic headspace.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these supposed elites are actually thinking they're doing what's right for the collective.
Totally agree with that.
Because they do buy into scarcity, they buy into the lack of resources and all of these other different concepts that we've engaged with as stories to help shape creation. They think those are all true and unchangeable. And so when they're operating from that headspace, of course, transhumanism sounds ideal because they think there's only one expression. And so you want to extend.
The body is limited, so we need to find something that's better than the body.
Yep. And it's that lack of recognition that drives how they experience. And based upon their position within the hierarchy of our reality, that, and again, we've all allowed for that. We all refer to them and enable their positions.
That's why I struggle and hesitate to call them the powers that be, because like trying to find a word for what it is that does right now in this now moment exist, but like I don't want to keep referring them as the powers that be because they're not actually powerful. It's all based on our collective agreement that they are powerful,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just they're others. There are others that are currently in the driver's seat of this experience because we've allowed them to be.
Yeah.
We didn't want to drive. We called shotgun. We're sitting back as passengers. And as soon as we actually realize our influence on not only our own reality and how it expresses, but also the collective, background narrative that's taking place, we can get back into that driver's seat. Mm-hmm. And it's a process to get to that place. And again, things don't happen instantaneously. That's the problem. And so this is basically a presentation I'm putting together. I have not finished it. Some of the guys in our men's group have seen some of this, but in essence, what you're looking at right now is this is the rendering engine. This is the 8, in a very simplified version where above is the mental plane, below is the material plane.
When we say the rendering engine, it's the engine that drives this reality,
that drives the creation of this experience.
Got it.
And so we currently exist. We're perceiving right now from below that horizontal line, which is the horizon line. So below that horizontal line is the effectual plane. This is the gross material plane. And so this is, again, that's why I have a clockwise circle, and within it, you see the word effect. And going to breaking down that word, E is mental energy, F is frequency of thought. When the F is repeated, a doubling, it's a field. And so energy, field, and then energy, C, vesseler gain. ECT is energy, C, vesseler gain. This is a materialization. This is the invisible now becoming visible. So the energy of the field is now becoming visible. This is effect, okay? Above that, above that horizontal plane, or line rather, above the horizon, is the mental plane. And that's the causal plane. And it's interesting too, when you break the word cause down. C is to C. The AU, which we associate with gold, is the temporal collective. And then SE is vibrational energy. C, temporal collective, vibrational energy. Cause materializes and becomes effect. Okay, so that's a simplified version. When you look at this different quadrants, this is the arc and the angels, right? The archangels is the different quadrants where there's an arc and an angle. There's the period of creation, and then that creation, which is an idea. You think of this as a creation it's the idea. That idea then becomes perfected, which is formation. And then that formation gets materialized. So it goes down to materialization, and then it gets experienced, which is sensation. And so the realm of thought is idea and the blueprint for the idea. So creation and formation. And then when it comes into the realm of action, which is the material plane, it's materialized and experienced sensation. Okay. What came to me, and again, this is where it comes down like very random occurrences. I was driving to pick my wife up from work. This is 2 years ago. We were living in Massachusetts at the time. And while I was driving, again, my head's always thinking about these types of things. This idea of 3, 4, 5, 6 came into my mind. And I didn't know what to make of it. I just quickly wrote it down as soon as I got to where I was going. She comes into the vehicle. I'm excited. I'm sharing with her. She has no idea what I'm talking about. Half the time she doesn't, but she's very polite. She just listens. So I'm like 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my gosh. It took a while for this to unfold within my mind. And that's often what happens. Like, that's why I always share with people. Like, when you have an idea or thought and you feel like inspired, write it down. It might not make sense to you, but I'm telling you, if you just sit with it over time, it's going to reveal itself. And more often than not, when we're not engaged and connected, we just disregard it. We throw it away. And so this idea 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 is creation, 4 is formation, 5 is materialization, 6 is sensation. I often in the past, I thought formation, and many people do think that that's talking about material, that something becomes formed, that it's becoming like a physical expression. That's actually not true. Form is the blueprint, and which is why we have forecasts. We're casting the 4. We're casting that blueprint. Foreshadowing. What are we doing? We're again working with the energy of the 4, the blueprint. And 5 cycle. And again, this is where the 5 and the 6 on the bottom, it's the physical experience. But what's interesting more is when you look at, now we see them together. And so you see these petals right now written 3 and 4 above the horizon, 5 and 6 below the horizon. 3 and 4 goes counterclockwise, because again, the mind operates reflecting. It's like reflecting backward rather, where we're thinking. And when we're actually taking action steps, we're moving forward in the way that we perceive time. So 3, 4 counterclockwise, 5, 6 clockwise.
Wow.
3 and the 4 above together create the 7. And this is 7 heaven. Heavens are above in the mental plane. 7 is evolution. It's learning. It's having you having their experience and then learning from it. The 3 and the 5 on the right side is the 8. That's the feedback loop. That's the rendering engine. That's experimentation. The 5 and the 6 below is 11. That's mastering the physical experience. It's optimization of the reflection. And then the 4 and the 6 stacked is 10. And that's coming back into self. That's the induction. And so again, it starts as 3, 4, 5, 6, and then together you start to see these pairings. It's 7, 8, 10, and 11. And again, if you collapse the 11 upon itself, it's 2. 2 is a reflection. Collapse the 10 upon itself, it's 1, the initiation, the induction. So what you're looking at right now is actually the K, the letter that we know of the K. So if it's spun, actually, let me center that. Oh, 1 second. Move the access point to the center. Okay, there we go. This is a K. It dawned on me when I started thinking about the K, just the symbol. And again, I have to look at these symbols from every angle, realizing that that's what makes it a symbol. It's like it's perceived from every angle. And so we might draw the character in a certain way to represent the letter of our alphabet, but it shows up in a myriad of ways. And you see in other quote unquote languages, you've seen the same symbol in different manners. But I was like, well, if it's just a baseless pyramid with a horizontal line, and the K to me is referencing a knowing. It's like witnessing reality and truth. There's nuance there, but let's just start with that baseline. There's only that one point of intersection, and it dawned on me that this is the original sun. This is when the blueprint is rendered in its impurity. It is just that center point of experience. And that's the original sun. It projects reality in truth where it is experienced as timeless and unchanged.
So for those that are listening, what he has is a K turned
90 degrees.
90 degrees, where the straight line of the K is now horizontal, and then the 2 45-degree angle lines of the K are projecting outward, and then there's a sun in the middle of it.
At the center point, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about the other letter that's similar to this when it's capital A. And how does the K and the A relate to one another? And I was like, and I refer to the A as temporal. It's referring to the temporal plane. It's referring to the having the physical experience. And it dawned on me that all of the A is really showing us is this baseline falling.
Wow.
And so here's the fall. And it dawned on me that this is the base. When this baseline follows, that experience at the center point that's timeless and unchanged becomes changed. And this is a new sun. And it instantaneously produces the moon. Because the sun projects our reality, the moon normalizes our reality. And so,
especially, that's so crazy to think about, because I just had a mind-blowing epiphany, and you've probably already thought of this, and you'll probably be able to articulate it way better than I can. The moon is what typically, if women are really connected to nature, is what directs their cycles, their menstrual cycles, which are the cycles of creation. That is crazy to think about with respect to what you're showing here. So I highly recommend people watch this episode rather than listen, but I can kind of narrate, or Pete, you go ahead and narrate what we're looking at.
And I can send you slides if you need to, and if he wants to put in better pictures.
Wow.
So at the center point of the K, that idea of being a timeless and unchanged, this is all of us experiencing reality as intended by the one self.
Yeah.
As soon as we use our free will, what are we doing? We're wanting to change that. And it's through the act of desiring change that causes the fall. And it's reacting to our desires. That's what it comes down to. In the game, we want to start changing things. And so what does it do? It lowers that horizontal line and now produces another sun in correspondence with the moon. And it's the lag in between that creates our perception of time. All time is the lag between a desired change and the change being implemented.
Wow.
That's it. And so this idea of raising consciousness, we're actually seeing time speed up. Of course it is. Because if I were to take this line and raise it up, what happens? These are converging.
Wow. Time becomes shorter. Wow.
Shorter and shorter. We're seeing things more rapidly express themselves.
Oh my God.
And what's also cool too about the moon shows us the state that we're in. The waxing and waning of the moon is the filling up of desired change. It becomes full. It's full. Can't take anymore. It's all of our changes are there being normalized. And then it implements those. And so the waning is the implementation of our desired change into our reality. And what happens when it's fully implemented? We have a new moon. It's a new rendering.
Wow.
All our experiences are now there to be had. And it's a constant cycle of desired change, implementation, desired change, implementation. Now, what's incredible is we also have the larger wheels of this experience. So this is our daily cycle, right? Our daily cycle and monthly cycle of experiencing, and we see the raising and the lowering of the quote unquote sun, or depending on how you're picturing this reality, the sun, showing itself and then leaving. It's expressing, it's projecting our reality and then giving us a time to recalibrate. If we look at the cycles of the year as we perceive them,
dude, that blew my mind. Had you thought about that on the moon is dictating the creation cycle of this plane because it dictates menstruation?
It was the letters. I always use the letters to inform me. So M is mental, the double O is creation, and N is normalized. So mental, create, normalization. And you even see it in other ideas of the moon, lunar. L is consciousness. The UN together is new. It's collective normalized. When the collective normalizes something, what is it doing? It's bringing in something new. So I refer to the UN as new. So consciousness, new, temporal reflection. Both moon and lunar both refer to that same idea. My interpretation of equinox and solstice might be slightly different, but their influence on our reality is the same. And this is really what's going to, I think should grab your attention and the attention of anybody that gives attention to this podcast, this episode. Depending on where we are from a solstice equinox standpoint, solstice is when it implements. It's the soul. Soul is the blueprint. It's now bringing it to ice. It's isolate. It's fixing it into our reality, right? So I say here, solstice marks the beginning of the next version of our collective script. This adjustment to the narrative is based upon previous evaluation. It's after the equinox period between autumn equinox and winter solstice is a read and evaluate. It's gauging all of our energies. And then the winter solstice to the spring equinox, it runs script. And so on and so forth. From spring equinox to summer solstice, it's reading and evaluating. Now, knowing that, look at the timing of when these world events happen. What's going on right now? We're in an evaluation stage right now. So based upon people's buy-in to all of these narratives that are going on, what are we doing? Calling forth more of those experiences.
Wow.
Because right now it's calculating on all of us. If you think about all of the different sort of quote unquote false flags, when do they occur? During the autumn equinoxes or the spring equinoxes. Very rarely do you have a circumstance like that on a global level, so to speak, that happens during this, after the solstices and before the equinox. Because it's a wasted effort then, because right now it's just running what's been already pre-calculated.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So again, when we understand the wheels of this experience and how this experience renders, it starts to make a lot more sense. And it's like, stop, buying into all of what you're being told to buy into and start to shape this experience according to your own will, using your own senses. Again, go back to a child. Ask a child if, what their religion is, or are they this or they that. And they may have at this early age been told by their parents that there's something, but they don't identify with any of that.
Yeah.
They don't walk around and be like, I'm Christian. I'm very rarely, unless they're completely indoctrinated. They're just having fun. They're just experiencing. They're out on the playground, using all their senses and very much in that now moment. And it's like, if we all, take from that and just learn from that and use all of our learnings that we've had. I mean, there's a reason I've been around for almost 45 years now, and I've learned from all of those experiences, but I now don't let any of that dictate how I experience right now. It's just like that helps shape my perspective, but I now am trying to perceive everything from a new perspective. And again, this is why, Paul Selig's more recent book resonated with me so much, because he talks about, behold, I make all things new. Behold, I make all things new. Every experience that we have, if we're able to shed it from previous programming and expectations of what that experience is supposed to be, and just let it happen and express, we've enabled it to become new.
Mm-hmm.
And the same could be said about all these devious actors in our reality. Again, D. Whenever you see D, it's in-game perspective. So DE is dimensional energy. It's the energy of the in-game perspective. MON, mental, fully normalized. A demon is nothing more than somebody that's locked into that materialistic viewpoint and letting that drive their experiences.
Wow.
What happens? They often do quote unquote demonic things. Satan, SA is vibration, temporal. Vessel or game, temporally normalized. Again, Satan is this idea of a larger scope of reality being very materialized and letting that materialization drive its experience.
Wow.
Like all of these words are communicating these deeper knowings to us. but it's like we have the ability to change, how we're interpreting things.
Yeah.
And that's, again, anger and angel, the ANG, temporally normalized spirit, spirit being the energy of the game, temporally normalized spirit. If you're just reacting to the energy of the game, that's ER, energy reflect. So temporally normalized spirit, energy reflect, that's anger. If you have somebody that's operating from that perspective, you add a D to the beginning. We know that word is danger.
Danger.
Right? If you want to change it and use the actual consciousness and observe what's going on and recalibrate, instead of an ER, it's an EL, angel.
Wow.
All the idea of angels and heavenly, it's just the idea of using the powers of observation in the now moment to recalibrate how you experience. That's it. It's that simple.
Wow. Do you have a presentation on the actual letter symbols themselves?
Not fully.
Okay, could we go through that though, like what each one of them is? Because I know you've done a lot during this, and I know it's different contextually, like if there's one right after the other, but just I guess very generally, like what's A?
Okay, so
You just went over what A is.
Yeah, let me
But
share my. So what I was doing initially was, and this was something that's like I started working on it, but I just recently got to a point of completion, but I have not launched yet. So what you're asking for right now has been requested by anybody that's given me attention at all for quite a while, and I keep meaning to. It's like I'm working on a book. I'm like, I'll have
yeah,
it
a
done.
book, man. And throw all the things that you just showed on screen in there too.
Well, in the reason exactly. So that rendering engine, I realized that if I just give you the letter symbols and I give you my association, the concepts that I currently associate with these letter symbols, and again, if you ever see me break down, I'll use the equal sign. They don't equal these things. It's just the best concept that I can currently come up with that I think associated with this symbol.
Yeah.
If I just give you all that information, it is probably not going to make sense. It requires that mental model of that rendering engine and a knowledge of metaphysics in general for some of these things to start to resonate. And so with that being said, here you have, let me zoom in a little bit, the lowercase a. The lowercase a is just an inversion of the E, the lowercase e. And you can see if I spin it, it's lowercase e. Now, why do we add that stem to the lowercase a? To show you that this is its orientation. We're referring to the lowercase a instead of the e. And the main difference between those two, symbols as we know them, is E's referring to, like it shows you, let me go back here. It's showing you the mental plane influencing the material plane, right? And if I spin that again, you have the lowercase a, and that's showing you the energy of the material plane. And so lowercase a is temporal. I often say temporal, but it's the energy of the temporal plane. And it's reiterated when you see the capital A, again, showing you that fall, because again, we're experiencing now time, which is just the desired change and the implementation of change.
And again, these apply throughout with every word. That's the other thing to emphasize.
And across languages, any languages to use these symbols. That's what I've noticed with my buddy Max, and I'm actually learning German right now in Duolingo. Before that, I was studying Mandarin, just looking at different characters. But from what I can tell, all of these various languages that use these same symbols, which most people know as the Latin alphabet, are like the concepts hold true. And each one of those languages is just showing you a different nuance of the same overall concept, which is why it's really cool when you start to look and break take a particular word like a color, like the red, and then you break it down in English, break it down in German, break it down, in Spanish and Italian. You're going to start to see a much larger picture. It's like a bigger picture.
Yeah.
Where if we just focus on the one language, and you understand what language is, LAN is consciousness temporally normalized. So observation energy temporally normalized, and then the gauge, spirit temporal.
And this is what I mean, real quick, just as a pause. When I say it always applies, L is consciousness, and then A is temporal, and then N is always normalized. And so no matter the word, when you fit these letter symbols together, it always explains much more deeply what the word means than it appears to be with what we're taught.
And it's because at a subconscious level, which subconscious is just the collective memory, we know all of these things. And so we might be receptive to it at a subliminal or subconscious level and not be consciously aware of it. Yeah. Or it might be even in conflict with our conscious awareness, which is where the problem usually occurs.
Yeah.
But and again, N, the normalizer, and you'll see when the capital N, it's the up and down arrows. They're bringing things into balance. And so it's
Mm.
either normalizing, like normalizing to the material experience, which is something coming into physical experience expression, or normalizing from like a data standpoint. You're normalizing the data. You're bringing things into balance.
Wow.
So LAN, consciousness temporally normalized. GU, spirit collective. AGE, temporal spirit energy. All language is actually referring to is a common ground for us to communicate. That's it. And we know that. I mean, how like I mean, it seems so self-explanatory when you refer to it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
It's
like a duh. Of course, that's what it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the next letter that as we know it, again, the order of our alphabet, who knows if it's illegitimate or not, but just keeping with it, the next one is B. Now the lowercase b, you have the eye of incarnation, that vertical line, and then we're talking about this particular quadrant, which is the 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a physical expression, this is the B. This is the idea of being. We're existing. And here's what like it really mind blown when I first realized it is the other side of that is lowercase d, which is the dimension. This is the in-game perception. So your character, the physical expression is the B, and the in-game perception is the D. And what is it together? BD. It's the BD. This is the body. If you look at it from a full thing, BOD is being, full dimension. Y is rendering. Y is the feminine and masculine energy coming together and then implementing.
Wow.
That's all the body is. Body is just our physical expression and our playing. It's like creating the character for the game that you want to play and then actually playing it.
Wow.
And if you want to look at the uppercase B, it's just showing the high, both the stack, right? Which again, if you look at it as a circle initially, and you cut that circle in half vertically, and then you stack them, we're showing mind over matter. This idea of mind over matter is the capital B. It's showing us that. And so moving on, we then have C. And again, I have it broken up so that the opening is facing downward, because I was thinking about the orientation, how these letters work with one another.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing? You're seeing the temporal experience. And so I have the A there just to show you that that's the gap.
Yeah.
Oh, oops. So what are you seeing? You're seeing the temporal experience. Now, there are some letters where I'm not convinced that there's two, like a lowercase or uppercase or a majuscule and a minuscule. Like the C it's the same symbol for each. So for all likelihood, it's just the C is just one concept. It doesn't, show you a nuance with the lowercase.
Got it.
Moving on, I showed you D, which is dimension, in-game perspective. And then the capital D is just, again, showing you that larger dimension. And it's interesting too, when you look at this as a pi symbol, or the golden ratio rather.
Yeah, it is. Wow.
Let me zoom out a little bit. And so again, D is referring to dimension in-game perspective. Lowercase e we already talked about. And then you have the uppercase E, which again, it's showing you it's basically showing you that both energies. It's like we're referring to energy, and what energy are we referring to? Are you referring to a lowercase e or a lowercase a? Energy of the mental plane or energy of the temporal plane?
Mm.
The F is the lowercase f. You can see it's very similar to the S, except with a line. And I don't know if you've ever seen the F drawn with a wave. Some character, you'll see some languages will refer to like with an F with a squiggly.
Wow.
It's basically where it doesn't have a line, it's just the S is vibration. When it has the line, it's showing you it's energy that crosses, and this is frequency. This is thought energy.
It makes so much sense that the S is vibration, because when you think of like picture of what vibration is to look like, it's always like squiggly lines,
It's a sine
when
wave.
you measure it with something.
It's a sine wave.
Yeah.
So when somebody quote unquote dies, right? They're flatlined. They're no longer expressed in this reality. And when they express, you see the top and bottom curvature show up.
Yeah.
So it's like I had this line that came to me a long while ago, and I constantly go back to it because I'm like, at the time, again, I didn't know what I was talking about, but this idea of 9 is the line of the sign. I'm like, 9 is the line of the sign. 9 is the line of the sign. And I've always been very lyrical and poetic, but I didn't know what that meant at the time. I was very much into vortex mathematics and looking at the 3 and the 6 and the 9. And we had this idea of Nikola Tesla says, you want to understand reality, think, frequency, energy, frequency, vibration, 369. It's telling you, yeah, it's like this whole reality is the expressions of energy. And the energy of what? The masculine, the feminine energy. And when they express, we witness this physical illusion.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the capital F is just showing you which area it's dominating in, and this is the above, the mental plane. The G, again, is the counterpart to the lowercase b. Oops. Look at, what do I have? Something's active. Oh no, I have that's right, I have the curvature. So we sometimes see the G like that. And we've also seen a lowercase q similar to this, but with showing you the other direction.
Yeah.
Which I think is just indicating, are we talking about the experiencing or the rendering? Because I'll get to that when I explain.
What does G stand for?
G is spirit.
Spirit, yeah.
You can think of the G as the 6 and the 9.
Yeah, got it.
And you'll see it too when you look at like the lowercase g and the uppercase G, which are similar if you invert them. But the way I've drawn it here, you're just seeing like what's going on. It's talking about this whole encapsulation and rendering of this experience.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, you have the H. And so the capital H, this is one that I had a really hard time because I didn't have these visuals to help explain it. And here for the truth, Gerasimos had actually asked me, like, where do I get the connection between, H and soul?
Yeah. Like, how does H represent soul?
And so if I was talking about this experience, and, first of all, I'm going to show you like an area. And so if I wanted to express the middle of an area, all I could do, the simplest way, like everything has to be simplified. The simplest way to convey, I'm talking about the middle of something, is a horizontal line amongst two vertical lines.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the same symbol as a capital I. So we're incarnating at what? We're incarnating as the soul. The soul is just a blueprint.
Wow.
So that's why those letters are, characters rather, are the same. Capital I and the H, capital H rather, are very similar symbols, where just the orientation is telling you what we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And then the lowercase h, which again, I have two versions. I think this one's probably more accurate because it's when the soul is expressed, it's in the quadrant of the 5.
Mm.
And so it's showing you that quadrant. The I, again, we just talked about the capital I. Lowercase I, well, I think what it's actually communicating is a disconnect.
Oh, wow.
So,
From the original one source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're operating from our smaller self standpoint, we can think of ourselves as a lowercase I.
Yeah.
And then the J is just showing you that journey backward, like we're going back upward.
Yeah.
Then K, we talked about K. I have a lowercase version here, but I don't know that it's really.
K is knowing, right?
Yeah. And I've changed, like sometimes I refer to it as like witnessing. Yeah. It's really, again, you got to think of it as a reality when rendered in truth. It's experiencing that version.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you've ever been in a moment, like I've had, many moments like this where like no thoughts are in my mind at all. Like I'm in complete sensation mode. I'm like completely in that now moment. And all the sounds and colors around me seem so much more vibrant.
100%, man. You're describing my water fast.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like you're not allowing all of the preconditioning, all the programming, all these ideas, these categorization. That's modernity. It's the pinnacle of modernity is the age of data. And it's like all we're doing is what we're doing is basically creating more and more separation. And that's the thing of all of our sciences. What do? Smaller and smaller subsections. We're not talking about an atom. We're talking about a quark. We're talking about we're dividing.
Yeah.
Which is interesting when you think of some of the scriptures associated with like Jesus. Like he's not the divider. He talks about like different aspects of not taking. I'm not here to cause division or whatnot. It's when you bring things back into original expression, You're just witnessing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, your mind, your thinking mind might be like, well, what have I been told about that? Like I'm seeing this beautiful creature flutter around in my garden amongst other beautiful expressions. But my thinking mind's like, well, that's a butterfly. Not only is that a butterfly, that's a monarch butterfly. Not only is that monarch butterfly, it's in this stage of its life cycle.
Yeah.
Our mind will constantly populate with all these various things that we've been told.
Instead of just observing what is for its beauty. Interesting point. Why I brought up my water fast and experiencing that is because um when we're seeing reality as it is, we're free of that programming, as you say, right? And during my water fast, a friend of mine, Mike Cardamone, who's done quite a few fasts, said that you will fall in love with the feeling of emptiness. And what he was referring to is empty of the programming, because not only was I not putting more density in my body in that I wasn't putting food in, but additionally, I was free of emotions because so much of that came to the surface and I was sort of forced to deal with it. So I was free of all of it. So I think in that moment, really, really seeing reality as it was without the programming at all.
Well, that resonates a lot with what you just shared. Um, yeah, we need to that moment of quote unquote innocence, that moment of what we would refer to in the modern age as humility, where we escape from all of that different programming and just witness.
Hmm.
Um, so what you're looking at right now, whether it's the lowercase L, which again we know also we've seen it as a capital I, or the number one, it's just a vertical line. And so what's the connection between those? One, ONE, fully normalized energy. L is consciousness. I is incarnate.
Hmm.
What do we right now while having this experience? We're fully normalized to this experience as what? Consciousness incarnated.
Hmm.
Why all of those, that vertical line is associated with all of those various, symbols. They're expressing all of those various concepts. And then the capital L is just showing you that right angle. And it basically you're observing from two different perspectives. You're having the in-game perspective and you're also observing it from above.
Hmm. Consciousness. Yeah.
And it's interesting that we call it quote unquote right angle. And the M is mental. And so it's showing you the upper half and coming together and influencing. That's that center point.
Hmm.
So creation and formation, 3 and 4, coming together because they operate in the heavens, the mental plane, and they render at the center point, which we know as also the inversion, which is W, which is the wave or water. It's the implementation of the new energy that ripples through our reality. We already talked a little bit about N, lowercase n, which is just the inversion of the lowercase u because it's the collective that has to be normalized, or the uppercase N, which is the up and down arrow, referencing normalization. O, we've already talked about. Again, it's just a single character. I showed you two different like a smaller circle to demonstrate maybe the idea of a lowercase o, but it's
And
really
O
just,
is complete, right?
it's full or complete. Or talking
Full.
about something in its entirety. And then the P, lowercase p, but they're really the P. And so the P is perception. It's the upper room. And what are you perceiving? You go back down to lowercase d, in-game perception. And what's interesting about this this is your Kundalini masculine serpent. The P and the
Wow.
D, the PD. It's your perceiving dimension, whether you're viewing from the big picture or small picture in character. This is the energy. We observe through these different portals,
Mm-hmm.
and that's masculine energy. Versus the inverse of that would be the G, or really the Q and the B. So going back to that. That's your feminine energy.
Mm.
And so again, mother, mental, full, vessel game, soul, energy, reflect. Mother is the energy of the physical game, the game we're experiencing. And then when we experience mother, we're experiencing it from the P and the D, which is in-game perspective, or bigger picture perspective. And so and that's associated with father. Father is frequency, so thoughts, temporal, vessel or game, and then her again, soul energy reflect. So the father impregnates mother. So father is like the ideas, all of different potentials come up into this quadrant of 3, and then they venture over to 4 where they impregnate mother. So 3 becomes 4, and then 4 gives birth to the son, which is the being of 5. And then collectively, it's daughter. Daughter's the in-game experience as a collective.
Mm.
And so again, it's really the challenge that I've faced, and many, if you encounter my work, you have to try to shed all the previous notions for these words. I got caught up so like along looking at like mother, father, son, daughter, he, him, her, like based upon gender as we know it. And when I started just to break them down and allow them to just basically communicate their insights to me, it changed everything.
Wow.
And so Q is I refer to it as counting or to the degree. So let me get rid of that B.
Counting or to the degree.
Yeah, it's like it's a calculation of sorts, and you can see it better with the Q, the capital Q. It's a circle with a notch in it. It's showing you like we're talking about the whole, something in its entirety, and we're talking about right here.
Got it.
And so the Q is a calculator. It's calculating something, which is why this idea of quantum, right? Quantum, of course, it's quantum. Everything's quantum, and the Q is always associated with or followed by U, because the collective is the only thing worth calculating. And so QU is to the degree or counting the collective, and then quantum is A and T. The ant is temporally normalized vessel or game, collective mental. So calculate, collective, temporally normalized vessel or game, collective mental. Quantum is just referring to the fact that we co-create this reality based upon our thoughts. And when our thoughts are normalized and then go from a potential to become an actualization, it's expressed. And so during its stage of just calculation of potentials before actualization, it operates in the quantum space. It's outside of the temporal experience. And R is the reflector. You can see it as a capital P with a dash down just toward 5. You're perceiving what? You're perceiving the materialization. You're perceiving the reflection. S, again, we saw with the lowercase f before with the horizontal line at the midpoint. If it's no line, we're just talking about vibration. If you see it together with lowercase f, just the line. Or the uppercase S, the larger, just showing the two, 4 to 5. So 4 to 5, we have this idea of 45-degree angles. Anybody that follows, and learns about the chestahedron, is it Frank Chester? I can't try to remember his name. He talks about that shape and the importance of 45-degree angle within the heart. It's like I don't know the nuances of the heart and all of the different aspects that he's looked into, or even Thomas Cowan. All I do know is that when they said 45, I was like, of course it's 45 because it's a blueprint then expressed. It's expressed as what? Vibration, because the earthly physical plane is always in motion. It's always in constant vibration. And the vibration is influenced by what? The frequency. Frequency is the information. Vibration is the information then rendered. The T. So the capital T. So if you see that horizontal line at the midpoint, at the horizon line, we're talking about just below it. So the incarnation below. So that's why T.
What does T represent?
The vessel, or I often will say vessel or game. In this case, it's talking about the game. This is a tribulation. Temple or tribulation, whatever you want to refer to it. I'm talking about the physical experience.
Okay.
And that's what the capital T shows you. Now, if we're talking about the lowercase t, which is interesting, what happens? Now there's a little poke through that veil, through that horizontal line. We're now influencing the mental plane.
Wow. And
so us as a temple, we're having a tribulation, but we're influencing its creation. We've been given dominion over all of creation.
Have you thought about that with respect to the symbol of the cross?
Yeah, all the cross is just showing you. And we've seen the cross with a circle. So here, if I were to get rid of that, double this. Hold on one second. If I were to extend this fully up top, and then give you capital O. We know this this is a sun cross.
Yeah.
All the ancients were communicating was this game. And when we're in a lesser, so here's where it gets interesting to the idea of yugas. The closer
Like the
we are
yuga
to
cycle, right?
yeah. So if you think of circles, again, everything radiates from a center point. Our reality is initiated at the center point. And through our deviation from that center point, we create this notion of time. And so from a yuga cycle standpoint, and I do have this in one of my episodes, just to some degree. Let me see, hold on one second. Oh, of course, I'm on the spot, can't do anything right. There we go. Let me shrink this down. Probably saw that earlier when I was showing the rendering engine. I had a bunch of concentric circles, just in slightly the idea is the closer we are to experiencing that center point, to me would be more analogous to experiencing a better age, so to speak. And so if we're experiencing it on the perimeter, like this large circle, which is displayed by the sun cross, showing you where we're deviating in all directions.
Got it.
Where that's associated with like basically the Iron Age, the Kali Yuga, the modernity. And as we start to increase our awareness of self, and we'll start to see quote unquote time speed up, we'll become better and better at crafting this reality according to our own the way it should be in an optimized way. We're experiencing tighter circles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that's that idea. We get close. All right. We already talked about P. Talked about Q.
We were at T.
Yeah, sorry, T. So now U. We talked about U. U is the collective, whether it's an inversion of the N, because the N is all that being that comes normalized, which is so interesting.
U is the collective.
Yep. And so this idea of fear, the only thing to fear are fear of the unknown. The un is the current. It's the current reality.
Collective normalized.
Yeah. So when a collective normalizes something, it's un. That's you're talking about something. Whatever the current happening is. When it's normalized collective, so the inverse NU, which again you can actually phonetically read as new, we're talking about a new implementation.
Wow.
So whether it's the current program or the next version of the program, so fear of the unknown is just fear of the current reality. Like you've rendered a reality according to your thoughts, action, and beliefs. You believe this reality is something to be fearful of. Well, the only thing to be fearful of is the unknown is what you currently think is true.
So can I try that real quick? So U is the collective, or so unknown would be collective normalized because UN, and then K is knowing, and then normalized whole or complete. What's W?
Wave. So it's like a ripple of energy. Yep.
And then N is normalized.
Mm-hmm.
So can you break that down in complete on unknown? How that?
Yeah, and don't listen. I have some like cheat sheets. I'll send you a cheat sheet. It takes practice, and once you continue to practice, and again, you'll make your own connections. You'll get better and better at it.
Yeah.
Like I don't expect anybody to be able to just rattle off and make the same connections. And I also have a different perspective based upon my own experiences. So the connections that I make might be different from yourself and somebody else. But anyway, unknown. So the current, witnessing, normalize, full wave, normalize. All that's known is that which is currently here. So you think of, this is a good one. So now, like the idea of K now, witness in the now moment, and the NOW, we've also seen, and if you change the letter arrangement, it's one or own. So the now moment, when you want it and you own it. So it's fully normalized the current energy. Like the new rendering comes into this reality as a ripple, a wave. And when we integrate that new wave of information, we've normalized to it.
Wow.
And the K is just talking about witnessing that. And so fear of the unknown is just, we're no longer creating anything new in this reality. All we're doing is perpetuating that which we've been told already exists.
Wow.
Which is why it's so hard to break records. What happens when a record is broken? It's broken a ton of more times instantly.
Yeah.
Because somebody has had enough fortitude and will within their own individuated node to cross that threshold of old experience and create something new. Like that should be the regular. The reality, if we were to have this experience in an optimal way, it would probably be very much like all like those old role playing games where there's a vast amount of quote unquote land, and then there's all these unique villages, and each one of the village has its own expression. Like that's the idea of all having like a bunch of sections of or groupings of nodes of consciousness creating their own individual worlds or realities, and that we can venture from one to another and have completely different experiences.
I think that's what we're moving towards. I mean, it already is kind of like that, but in a more beautiful way. I think that's what we're moving towards as we dissolve all the stuff.
Yeah.
Let's say there's a lot of stuff to dissolve, but that's what we're moving towards.
And the only way we do that is to start to untether from global and start
Yeah.
engage with local.
Yep.
And you look at the agendas with the technologies, it's trying to
centralize. It's all about centralization. Whereas there's a big emergence and thought of the need to decentralize governance, decentralize technology, decentralize communities. It makes sense.
Yeah, it's a last ditch effort to try to maintain that one ring to rule them all.
Yeah.
The V is talking about descending. It's the descending energy. And so it's like a baseless triangle inverted. This is the energy of masculine and feminine coming together in a center point. And when that V becomes rendered, it goes from a V to a Y. And that's the implementation. So if you think about as the idea, the masculine energy idea, the feminine energy normalizing that idea, creating that blueprint, and then rendering it into the incarnation. And so the V is descending, which again, we think of words like love. What is love? LOVE, consciousness, full descending energy. This is receipt and observing the full energy that's coming into this experience, coming into your being from the one self. There's nothing more loving than that. And when you share that connection, which usually comes through the gateway of the heart with others, you love them. And when you're operating from that state of being, you're in love. Incarnate normalizing love. Versus fear, frequency, which is thought. EA is powering. So it's energy, mental energy of temporal together is powering this experience. And powering what? The reflection. When your thoughts power your reflection, you're in a state of fear. Because often we're operating from in-game thoughts. And so are you just allowing and staying in a place of acceptance and knowing that you're taken care of, knowing that this is a beautiful experience to be had and that you're here with intention and purpose? You're operating from love, or are you letting your mind go crazy with all of this propaganda and everything else and letting fear drive it? We talked about the W. I'll get rid of the Y. Inversion of the M. It's just the mental becomes implemented. So it goes from a mental to the wave.
Mental to the wave. Wow.
The X, X marks the spot, it's the center point. X is crossing. See, like the idea of it's like centering energy or crossing energy. It's showing you some sort of crossing, which is interesting too. When you talked about previously some of the mythologies, right? This idea of the wolf. There's I think a story of the wolf chasing the fox. Wolf, wave, full conscious thought frequency, right? F is frequency. So wave, full conscious frequency. Fox is frequency, full crossing. So it enters as a wolf, and then we have the experience, and then the experience, our thoughts of that experience cross up to the 3. So it goes from 6 to 3, and that's the fox. 4 to 5 is the wolf.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's also many stories too. If you start to dig into it, to where the idea of the moon didn't exist in our skies.
It's so crazy you say that, because Kylie and I were just talking about that the other day.
Well, there's in the idea of like if you watch like Vibes of the Cosmos, which is super interesting. You see the moon as a reflection of our lower plane.
Yep.
Again, our minds will see what are like, or our senses, right? Our senses will take in the information that our minds are ready to receive, which is why you can point something out to somebody and they'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't see that at all.
Totally.
They're not ready to comprehend it.
Yeah.
And we've all had that experience where you're looking at something and you don't see it, and then somebody points something out to you and you can't unsee it. Like they'll look at the clouds and be like, that's the shape of a bunny.
Or even like a way of perception without actually physically looking at something. Once you see things a certain way, you cannot unsee them. Or I guess once you know, you can't unknow.
Yeah. which is what the word mean refers to. Mental power normalized, like mental power normalized is mean.
Yeah.
So when somebody's like, what do you mean? They're saying like, help bring my mind into normalization with yours. And what's super interesting is when you see the same letters like rearranged, we have the word name, normalized temporal mental energy. So my expression being normalized within your mind, you are giving me a name. And if we both agree, what do we often say? Amen. It's temporal mental energy normalized. Amen. It's like it's the same assortment of letters, just rearranged to communicate little nuances. Mean, amen, name. So interesting. Again, we talked about the Y, and then the Z, the rotation of the capital N. So where the N is normalizing the mental to material from a basically like a dimensional standpoint, the N is normal, or the Z rather, capital Z is normalizing a temporal standpoint. So it's like bringing the idea of past and future together into the now moment.
Wow.
And so I look at the Z as referencing the present moment, the now moment, which is interesting again when you think of the idea of Zen, now energy normalized, getting to that Zen state.
Wow.
So that's a quick rundown of all of the letters as I see them. And again, there's nuances when you start to see letter pairings that show up over the time, like whether it's letter doublings or
like
letter
an
pairings.
A and an E together as an example, right?
Yep, exactly. And this also too, when you think of, again, what is this all of these different scriptures and spiritual texts, what are they communicating? That there's two aspects of being, and there's not always, during the golden age, they're not in feud with one another. They're in balance. But during the material Iron Age, where they're at war with one another. And it's like, you start to realize that a lot of these words that have quote unquote negative connotation all communicate that. This idea of disinformation, DIS, what is dis? Dimension, incarnate vibration. Dimension, the in-game perspective of your incarnation reverberating. Dis. We already talked about being like the current. It's all basically saying if you're materialized, if you're operating from an in-game perspective, operating from the old, because that's all things are, everything's old, and not allowing anything new, then you're operating from all of those like it's so interesting when you start to recognize those connections. And science, like the idea of science, like that's the challenge with science. Science, it was initially created to help us better recognize this physical experience and how things are expressing. It's like taking the masculine and feminine energy and seeing the various, like all of what we witness in flora and fauna are just different recipes of that energy.
Yeah.
And science helps us, look at how those things are expressing. But in this modern age, sciences are just being used to validate, legitimize, and basically lock in place.
It's essentially taking what was intended to help us understand this realm, and now it's using it to manipulate how we see this realm.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Man, God, dude, it's crazy because every time you show what the letter symbols mean with respect to a certain word, it never fails. And I've known you now for what, like 2 years? And you often comment on something that I say or in our men's group, or it always makes sense. Every single time. It blows my mind how much it makes sense. And I have the wow moments, like, wow, because like when I read The Law of One, like when I first heard Dr. Cowan speak, countless times throughout my life, when someone is pointing to something that is fundamentally a deep truth, it's not that I didn't already know it. It's like I already knew that on some level, which is why it's like oh wow, right? It's like just a deep knowing that you're helping to pull out of others and how you analyze these words. It's amazing.
Yeah. And listen, I'm right there with you. Half the time I'm having those Mao moments.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which is why I made that connection with Gerasimos, because he's like, where did you come up with Palm Wondrous? I'm like, because when I had that spiritual experience, that Kundalini awakening, that Nirvana moment, everything became new. And I kept referring to things as wondrous. It's like everything became magical.
Wow. What is the
it,
palm? What does the palm mean?
that's just my initials.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Got it.
Um, and so yeah, it's just I'm always having those moments. Like my wife is
Mm.
just she's gotten used to it, but I mean I'll wake up in the middle of the night and like be so excited where I can't fall back asleep because I've had something coming through rattling in my mind.
Wow.
And as soon as she wakes up, I'm like sharing with her, and of course she doesn't understand any of it. Like maybe some a little bit,
You can
but it's
feel it though.
yeah.
Yeah. She
Like
can
she
feel
feeds
it.
off. She can feel the excitement. She knows
Yeah.
that I'm like I'm clearly excited about something. Um, but yeah, it's just yeah, it's a fun place to be, which is why it sucks when going back to the beginning when people get caught up in the ongoings that they're being told that are happening in our
Mm.
reality, whether they're true or not. If they're not, if you're not sensing it with your own, and of course people be like, you're irresponsible. It's going to affect me eventually. If they allow it there, they're going to allow it here. Listen to what you just said. Listen to what you've just forecasted for yourself. It's
It's a
just
really good point, and I've done that.
we all do it. We all have a tendency to do it because our
Yeah.
modern way like taught us that. But it's like again to constantly reinforce it with my own mind that today's thoughts are tomorrow's experience. Today's thoughts are tomorrow's experience. It's like okay, what do I want to experience? That's what I should be thinking about.
And I already know this at a deep level, and that's why it's beautiful that I have people like you in my life to be that reminder. Because I think like all of us are subject to getting pulled back into the illusion, and that's why it's so helpful to have community of people around us who are like, no, 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 look over here,
Hmm.
remember, remember, remember.
And it's just it's yeah no, and I appreciate that. I mean, you do the same for me. I mean, and Steve and I talk about it all the time. Where like if we didn't have each other to share ideas with and just be openly expressed without judgment and to constantly get each other to remember abundance mindset, remember these things. I mean, all of us would be sucked back in.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of this game. And so yeah, no,
That's the whole point is we're here to show each other and help each other remember. That's it.
yeah, especially at this stage of the now moment.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity to speak
It was
on your
awesome,
platform.
man. It's mind blowing. It's great. Well, where can people find more of your work?
Yeah. So right now I have the YouTube channel. It's just Palm Wondrous. If you go to youtube.com
We'll
forward
put that in
slash
the show
palm.
notes too.
Yeah. And it's POMWONDROUS.
Mm.
I've been working on it for a while. I'm going to finally get my website out there soon, which is funny because I think I gave Yerasimos like the namecodes.com because I was
Mm.
going to, I break down people's names and understanding the subtle energies that influence how we experience. And then I have like birth codes and letter symbol sigils. These are different offerings that have come to me. But anyway, I thought namecodes.com, but then I just went to grab it, start building on it, and realized I don't own that. I don't own that domain. I thought I bought it. Somebody bought it in like 2000. I'm like, what? So it's probably going to be palmwondrous.com, but
That's cool. I love that. Put all your offerings there. Palmwonders.com / name codes. That's what you could do.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's
So
good. Man, this is an awesome conversation. Thanks for being here, dude. Thanks for being you.
yeah,
This was
thanks for
great.
having
And
it.
this was a good point of remembering for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Alec.